looking for escapism, I just want to escape.
Welcome back to my disembodied voice. In today's video, we are going to look at what betrayal does to the brain, someone's mental state, and also look at some examples of how this has been portrayed in movies and TV shows through character arcs, interactions through plot, and generally look at the psychological impact of being betrayed by a loved one, friend, or group. Now, as ever, I'm not reviewing any of the movies or TV shows here, just picking out some examples of where I feel the emotional effects of betrayal have been portrayed accurately. Anyway, let's crack on. First things first, what is betrayal? Well, according to Dr. Rockman of Science Direct, betrayal is the sense of being harmed by the intentional actions or omissions of a trusted person. In more detail, the most common forms of betrayal are harmful disclosures of confidential information, disloyalty, infidelity, dishonesty, and the effects of betrayal include shock, loss, grief, morbid preoccupation, damaged self-esteem, self-doubting, and anger. Betrayal can produce life-altering changes, mental contamination, and the betrayer commonly becomes a source of this contamination. The effects of catastrophic betrayal are most relevant for anxiety disorders, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and, in particular, post-traumatic stress disorder. Betrayal doesn't have to be isolated into adulthood. It can start in childhood, and it doesn't solely come from sexual partners as, be it friends, work colleagues, and even parents. The effects on the personality, self-esteem, and Axis 1 disorders such as anxiety and depression are both acute and protracted. So, for today, we will be looking at Emerald Fennell's Promising Young Woman, Coralie Farge's Revenge, George Lucas's Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, and also look at Rick Grimes in The Walking Dead. First things first, let's look at the biological effects of betrayal on the brain itself. Betrayal affects the limbic system and hippocampus areas of the brain. Now, whilst the limbic system deals with multiple features, the most crucial it deals with are emotion, motivation, long-term memory, and the fight or flight response. The hippocampus is our memory aid and, when included with the limbic system regarding trauma, means our whole methods of interaction, demonstrative and sensitive responses, preset emotional cues which correspond with our beliefs, attachment and perceptions of our phenomenal fields of reality are all severely impacted when something destabilizes our perceptual presets and interpersonal functioning. Violated attachments result in a rise in the immunosuppressive and catabolic hormone cortisol, and the amygdalocentric fight or flight centers of the limbic system are also affected. According to Psychology Today, betrayal inhibits the release of the hormone oxytocin, which is known as the love hormone, which increases our likelihood of forming future intimate relationships and bonding with others. So, deep within the centre of the brain, where the cingulate cortex is believed to play a role in fostering attachment and bonding with others, betrayal can actually cause a functional injury to the brain, which can take a long time to heal from. Feelings aren't physical, but the chemicals and hormones which create them are, and as we feel through memory, and memory affects our development as we are constantly learning inside our phenomenal field of reality, this affects our future interactions after an incident of being betrayed. We are all different and act differently to different events, but as betrayal is a negative event with negative connotations and negative valences, operant conditioning remembers this and affects us accordingly. Based on the theory that we all act on the pleasure-pain principle, which means we seek pleasure and avoid pain, betrayal is something which hurts because, in the pursuit of bonding and seeking new friends, romantic partners, or attaching to family, it's an attack on the most primitive and important feelings and neurological processes which are essential for survival and development. And one of the most important feelings for survival and development is quite simply trust. As human beings, trust is essential, as we do not meet people and tell them our deepest secrets, fart beside them, or get naked with them straight away. Instead, we have to pass stages of verification which, at their most basic form, open up the vulnerable sides of ourselves. Trust is a brain process that binds representations of self, other, situation, and emotion into a neural pattern called a semantic pointer. And from this semantic pointer, we navigate certain situations and gain interpersonal rewards. Trust comes in many guises. We trust the doctor who is going to cut us open and remove our gallbladder. We trust the police officer to take care of us. We trust our parents to feed, clothe and love us. And we trust our romantic partner to be faithful and honest. So we have things like social trust and emotional trust. Or, if you support a football team like myself, blind trust. Little psychiatric joke there. Trusting people involves estimations of probabilities of how they will behave. But people usually trust others without any understanding of probability or precise predictions about their behaviours. So, when we are betrayed and someone lets us down, the aftershocks are devastating. Trust engenders the positive valences of security and happiness, and, whether we hear a policeman or doctor has been found guilty of a serious crime or a loved one is cheating on us, the micro and macro levels of personal and worldly perceptions are altered drastically. And when this happens, when we are betrayed by someone we love, the mental scars, functional brain injuries, and existential crisis points can affect our whole way of life. Let's start with Cassie in Promising Young Woman. Cassie is a brittle, caustic, isolated, septic and hostile person, now reliving her deceased friend's sexual assault over and over in her mind. She goes out, acts drunk, lets a nice guy take her home, and, based on her preconceptions and mistrust and short-sighted assumptions that all nice guys are rapists in disguise, Cassie puts herself in danger every time she plays the drunken waif whilst plotting her revenge against those who failed her friend Nina after her ordeal. Cassie has PTSD and grief, but upon meeting Ryan, she slowly lowers her defences and places her trust in a man who makes her feel alive again. However, at the 2/3 point of the movie, where she is ready to walk away from her self-destructive crusade, stop living in the past and accept that a nice guy can exist, she is given a video showing that Ryan was at Nina's rape and cheered the whole thing. All the trust Cassie placed in Ryan evaporates upon seeing that mobile phone footage, and she goes to confront him. She then blackmails Ryan to give her the address of her final victim's stag party and demands he keeps his mouth shut about her impending arrival, or she'll release the video to everyone at the hospital he works with. Now, Cassie's threats of blackmail and plans to sabotage Ryan's life are not the issue I want to look at here, as those are reactive and proportional responses to his betrayal. What I want to focus on is how not only Cassie defaults back to her ascorbic and malignant side upon the betrayal, but how said betrayal puts her into such a tailspin that Cassie ends up dying whilst heedlessly taking her revenge. Well, not completely heedlessly, as she has a contingency plan thought out, which comes in handy at the end of the film, and she also goes prepared with scalpels and spiked vodka, but Cassie moves from teaching people lessons via emotional manipulation and just desserts to walking headlong into a situation she has no way to come back from. When we talk about logic and emotion, we speak about two separate parts of the brain. The frontal lobe deals with logic and reasoning, and the limbic system deals with emotion, fight and flight, and so forth. Now, Cassie has planned each stage of her revenge very carefully, and each part is Machiavellian to the point of brilliance. However, upon deciding to let Al Monroe, who was Nina's rapist, go and move on with Ryan, the ultimate prophecy that all nice guys are rapists comes true. Her trust is broken, and she accelerates her plan to not only get revenge on Al Monroe, but carve Nina's name into his chest. Upon Ryan's betrayal, she is reckless, aggressive, and, as detailed in her contingency plan, fully aware there is no coming back from what she's about to do. However, although she is upset, there is cognitive sequencing and, unlike someone we will come to later, she is aware of her environment and how much power she has. Ryan's betrayal breaks the foundations of Cassie's personality, beliefs and psychology and leaves her with nothing worth living for. Now, as cited above, betrayal causes a functional injury to the brain, so how we perceive, judge, think and engage with the world all become deeply affected. Cassie's core beliefs were that all men were evil and bad. However, Ryan changed her perception and she trusted him. But when Ryan fulfills her prophecy that all nice guys are bad, she decides to go and finish her mission. Now, although Cassie is emotional and reckless, she has enough mental capacity to see Ryan's weaknesses, his job and reputation, and she already has the outfit and drugs ready for her revenge, which suggests she already had a plan before his betrayal. Primitive backbrain/limbic thinking affects logic, but as we are unaware of how much time passes between Cassie seeing the video and then seeing Ryan, we don't see her full meltdown. As mentioned before, Cassie's personality was icy, brittle and ascorbic, and when betrayed, her default cognitive setting is that personality. The happy Cassie dies upon Ryan's betrayal, and the acidic Cassie takes control as the world has proved her perception right. So, how does betrayal make someone reckless? For Cassie, her functional brain injury is that she will never be able to trust someone again after Ryan's deceit, and, now angry at seeing Nina's rape on the mobile phone footage, she is even more scarred than before. As discussed in a previous video, we interpret the world via our 5 senses, and now Cassie has sights and sounds to put to the horror of Nina's ordeal. Her brain chemistry changes upon this new information, and her semantic pointers completely skew on their compass. Her previously Machiavellian methods of revenge are no longer sufficient, and she intends to scar Al Monroe for the rest of his life, both mentally and physically. Now almost possessed by a rage greater than herself, she deals in absolutes, holds no fear, and destroys everything she had with Ryan in one moment of revelations and threats. Betrayal affects the mind by severely triggering the limbic system. Basically, you enter a hyper or hypo-arousal where everything is threatening. In hypo-arousal, you become brain-fogged and can dissociate, or in hyper-arousal, we enter fight or flight as well as anger and panic, and everything feels threatening. And when we see everything as a threat, we are unable to interface with the world in a normal way. One such effect of this is called fire alarm thinking. Here, the hippocampus is triggered and starts scanning previous memories, and all these moments you had with someone are now no longer verified and feel unsafe. In this state, someone can feel a greater need for isolation, or, through feeling a loss of identity, can become reckless, angry, or even violent. For Cassie, every single moment she had with Ryan is tainted by this new revelation, and, coupled with every belief she had worked on eradicating through learning to love him, everything becomes raw, affected by fire alarm thinking, and her mind becomes highly toxic. Cassie had always planned on getting revenge on Al Monroe, but with nothing left inside of her and the rawness of betrayal, meaning she can never trust someone again, she sets off on a final mission of complete self-destruction. In Star Wars, we move away from sexual intimacy and discuss Anakin and Obi-Wan's friendship. Now, after the massacre of Order 66, Obi-Wan discovers that Anakin has turned to the dark side and, after watching some hologram footage with younglings, knows he has to face his best friend. Obi-Wan's issues here are different to that of someone like Cassie, as not only is his relationship with Anakin platonic, as Jedis are not allowed to fall in love anyway, but he feels responsible as Anakin was his Padawan, or apprentice in layman's terms. Now, disregarding the portrayal of Obi-Wan in the awful Disney Plus series, Anakin's betrayal tests Obi-Wan's faith immensely. However, he never stops loving him, and, maybe this is down to Jedi mindfulness, he doesn't become angry or let the experience alter his perception of the world. Judging by when we meet Obi-Wan in A New Hope, he has reached a form of peace with what has happened as, although he speaks about Anakin with some emotional conviction, he remembers him as a good friend. It's important to remember here, though, for Obi-Wan, that he separates Anakin and Darth Vader as two separate entities. It's this compartmentalization of what happened which helps him recover. Anakin was his friend, Darth Vader destroyed Anakin, therefore Darth Vader is the bad one, but his friend Anakin is always in the good memory. In A New Hope, Obi-Wan is Luke Skywalker's guardian. He watches over him on Tatooine and, eventually in both Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, never loses faith that Luke will do the right thing and restore balance to the Force. Going back to what we discussed earlier about fire alarm thinking scanning memories, it's this mental state that distorts every image and places our interpretation of the world on high alert. It's then that the anger, isolation, and pushing away of people who love us is common. However, Obi-Wan keeps his head and, although forced to duel with Anakin, a duel he wins through both control and exploiting Anakin's weakness of arrogance, he doesn't kill his friend and, later in life, his faith in Luke remains unshaken. Now, one could say that Obi-Wan thought Anakin was going to die anyway, but upon severing his limbs and getting him all toasty, Obi-Wan's emotion is released and he laments the fall of the Jedi and his best friend. He also walks away, as mentioned before, to compartmentalize the image of Anakin. He doesn't want to remember him screaming in hatred, so his friend Anakin remains in part of his brain that remembers him that way. As mentioned before, Obi-Wan will always remember Anakin as being destroyed by Darth Vader, not himself. Maybe that's a form of denial, who knows? Maybe that's a topic for a video later on. Here, Betrayal galvanizes Obi-Wan and, now preparing to live his life as a hermit while watching over young Skywalker, he starts to come to terms with Anakin's betrayal and never gets lost to negative emotions. Betrayal leads to less intense relationships due to the functional scars and fire alarm thinking, but Jedis don't have deep relationships in that sense, and had Obi-Wan's faith been removed completely, then he would have never sacrificed himself in A New Hope or even given years of his life to protecting the son of the man who betrayed both him and the Jedi. Like anything, betrayal can have a positive valence, and one of those things is making us wiser, hypervigilant, and also giving us a life lesson. The human mind can choose to implode, act out, or lash out, or it can evolve us. For Obi-Wan, the Jedi ruled the galaxy for many years and were peacekeepers. They were also honest, moral, and decent. Moral emotions have evolved over human time to help people stay connected to others in a world where transgressions such as betrayal would have had devastating consequences to small tribes and resource-sharing units. The Jedis are like monks, a cult or clan of religious worshippers, and they lean towards forgiveness and good. So, despite Anakin's horror and everything which has happened, Obi-Wan has faith that things can be restored and repaired, and, despite coming close to negativity in Return of the Jedi when he and Luke thrash everything out before the final battle, Obi-Wan deals with betrayal in a much more philosophical way. In Coralie Farget's Revenge, Mistress Jen is away with Richard, her rich and powerful paramour, when two of Richard's friends show up for a hunting weekend. Anyway, whilst Richard is away, Jen is raped by one of the men and, upon Richard's return, she tells him everything. Now, the sexual assault is not the betrayal here. Instead, it's from Richard as he is her lover, and it's in response to Jen's devastation. Jen wants to go home and she also wants justice. Yet Richard offers her money and, in a polite and controlling manner, tells her to shut up, take the check, and just forget this ever happened. Jen is appalled and wants to go home, but Richard refuses, so she states she will tell his wife everything. It's this threat which leads to her near death by being pushed off a cliff and then galvanizes her to return to take out each man in ever more painful ways. But the betrayal is from Richard when he offers her money instead of sympathy, support, and proper justice after her assault. Now, according to Psychology Today, there are 4 horsemen of moral experience. A bit like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, it was used as a metaphor in psychology, and these 4 horsemen are betrayal, which is the catalyst that begins the process that would create a potential need for forgiveness. Secondly, outrage from the victim, which is anger that is partly expressed outwardly, which functions to call out the transgressor and to lobby support for the victim. Thirdly, guilt in the offender, which functions to demonstrate via emotional and behavioural means, such as a genuine apologetic behaviour, so the offender can show they are truly sorry and that he or she can be trusted in the future. And forgiveness by the victim, which, if genuine, has the capacity to repair broken social connections that were affected by the betrayal. Now, Jen approaches Richard and states that his friend raped her. Richard is furious but states the answer is money and silence. So, stage 1, we have betrayal in Richard's response. We then get stage 2 in outrage from Jen. However, the remaining horsemen don't complete the cycle of reparation here, as Richard shows no guilt, only selfishness as Jen is threatening his personal life, and therefore there is no forgiveness. So, jumping back to the outrage stage, Jen is the victim and left with spite, apathy and shame. Richard is the offender but shows no contrition, so we cannot move to forgiveness or emotionally progress, so Jen is left with little more than a grudging hatred. Now, Jen has suffered a severe sexual assault and she is far too lost in a freeze/dissociated shock of trauma to be racked by fire alarm thinking, which is hippocampi processing, but the betrayal causes ultimatum rationality inside her mind. Like Cassie, she is angry, and there are going to be ramifications as we all seek reparations and justice where possible when we are wronged. However, whereas Ryan's betrayal revives and accelerates Cassie's plan for Al Monroe and is done through a kamikaze formulation of revenge, Jen cannot get home without Richard, and, stuck with three strong and powerful men, she is in real peril. Had she thought like Cassie, where there is outrage but cognitive sequencing, she would have taken Richard's money and got home only to destroy his life. But, caught within the aftershock of an assault, she can only deal with the here and now, such is her trauma. So, hurt and reacting to the betrayal of being paid off, she makes threats where she has no security and almost ends up dying because of this. Betrayal pushes our buttons and inhibits logical thought, and we need to be mindful of the environments and dangers which are around us when we are at our most raw. For Jen, she doesn't have the time or home advantage between trauma and betrayal, so her thinking is massively impacted. And it's this massively impacted thinking which nearly gets her killed. Finally, we come to Rick Grimes, and although I could do a whole video on Rick, one scene which makes me love his character definition is his execution of Gareth the cannibal. Now, Rick had many incidents where he's given no... I don't swear in my videos, so given no quacks, but this one is the one that really got me. After arriving at the Terminus Sanctuary in Series 4, only to find out it's not a sanctuary and its denizens are all cannibals, Rick escapes Gareth's crew early in Series 5. However, Gareth tracks them down, eats one of Rick's crew, well, Nibbles as they changed their mind upon hearing he was bitten by a walker, before cornering Rick's group at the church they are hiding out in. Anyway, Rick pulls off the old switcheroo and turns the tides, leaving Gareth to plead for his life. Rick doesn't entertain his pleadings though, and chops him up with a machete. In The Walking Dead, Rick has been burned time and time again by survivors of the apocalypse. Even his best friend was sleeping with his wife while he was in a coma, and his worldview, mixed in with a literal zombie apocalypse, is highly biased towards the negative. Now, he loves his group and would die for them, but when it comes to outsiders or anyone who has wronged them, he has no forgiveness and won't even entertain the notion of mercy. Now, betrayal happens time and time again in The Walking Dead. It's a recurring theme. And by the time we meet Gareth, Rick is too far emotionally scarred to expect decency of anyone. Due to being betrayed repeatedly, Rick's phenomenal field fire alarm thinking puts everyone as a risk, and therefore Rick himself takes no risks. However, with themes of resource guarding and the constant state of alertness within Rick's group, betrayal has altered Rick's attitude. Now remember, attitude is the pattern of characteristics across the whole matrix of the persona. His fire alarm thinking has become ingrained due to repeated betrayals, and even when Gareth is begging for mercy, and let's be honest, Gareth was probably lying, Rick doesn't even entertain the notion of giving someone the benefit of the doubt. Anyway, that's it for this week's video. Please like, share and subscribe, and feel free to leave a comment or make a suggestion for future videos. And until next time, I'll catch you later.
Put your guns on the floor and kneel.